Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Weapons deals, gang fights, more brutality by law enforcement, and out-of-control weather, along with Christians continuing to lose their faith, are just some of our reports for today's broadcast. Well, it seems like the world is out of control with no solution in sight, but we start our first report off today with United States President Barack Obama, as he recently spoke about the nuclear deal between the United States and Iran. The president spoke about how he would not accept a bad deal and how they were now working towards a comprehensive solution. He also said in that speech that this deal will have my name on it. So nobody has a bigger personal stake in it in making sure that it delivers on its promise. And Jeff, it's interesting to note that while he was giving that speech, he did have one of those Hebrew head coverings on, also known as a kippah. I thought that was pretty interesting while he was addressing those members there.
Well, the terrorist group, also known as ISIL or ISIS, managed to capture over half of Syria. Now, they've also taken hold of the American weapons left behind by the Syrian government. Interestingly enough, this leads us to the America's involvement in the weapons trade market. Now, the United States is the world's largest dealer of weapons, and they've just approved a nearly $2 billion arms deal to Israel. $1.87 billion to be exact.
Oh, that's a lot of money. Now, that deal includes 750 bunker buster bombs, 300 Hellfire missiles, 250 air-to-air missiles, over 4,000 glide bombs, and 14,000 missile guidance systems, which turns average bombs into bombs guided by GPS, so making them a little bit more accurate to hit their targets. Israel's order includes weapons they already have, which might suggest that they might need restocking after last summer's war in Gaza.
Well, Israel isn't the only one buying up weapons. The Saudis are also on a spending spree, buying big, fresh from their bombing campaign of Yemen. Now, that nearly $2 billion deal includes Seahawk helicopters, radars, navigation systems, and Hellfire missiles. Qatar, another Middle East nation, purchased Apache helicopters, as well as Javelin and Patriot air defense systems. Now, that package, well over $11 billion.
Amazing. Well, those Patriot air missile defense systems are in high demand, including by European countries like Poland, which is now in a multi-billion-dollar deal negotiating for weapons, citing their need of them because of Russian threats. Well, as the technology increases in warfare, so are the casualties. In fact, tripling from what it was 7 years ago. In 2014, for example, the number of casualties was over 180,000. And anti-war activist Brian Becker says Washington sees business opportunity in armed conflict. Interesting business.
Business opportunities.
That's right.
Well, mortar shells have fallen outside of the Russian embassy in the Syrian capital of Damascus. One person, a Syrian security officer, was killed and several more wounded. Russia confirms that none of their diplomats or staff have been harmed. Experts believe that this is a result of Al-Islam army attack, a faction of which experts say Saudi Arabia is the main backer of. Now, this army is now one of the biggest rebel factions in Syria and controls a large part of Damascus. This isn't the first time that they've launched mortar attacks against the Russian embassy, but it was the first time that there was a casualty, and that being that Syrian security officer that we mentioned.
That's right. Well, armed conflict is not just a part of the game international, but it is also very much a part of things domestically here in the States as well. YPN's Larry McGee has our conversation on America's internal violence and at least one factor behind it that is now officially on the verge of being accepted by the Boy Scouts. Well, Larry, what starts us off?
The Texan town of Waco is back in the news again these days, but this time the citizens themselves are guilty of intolerance, with the ripple effect ultimately involving and impacting police officials as well. An all-out brawl between rival biker gangs started with a fistfight in the bathroom and spilled out into the parking lot of a local Waco bar. Before it was over, 9 people were dead, 18 injured, and 170 people were hauled off to jail, charged with a capital offense. Police officials are bracing for retaliation, calling the incident, which netted a cache of weapons including 100 firearms, one of the most gruesome events they've yet to witness. The great news, Waco Public Police Information Officer W. Patrick Swanson says, is that the same thing can take place in any state and in any town across the United States. Speaking on the subject of violence and what is increasingly being identified by scientific reports as at least one of its causes, homosexuality is now being openly embraced by the Scouts. The national president of the Boy Scouts of America made a point of making it clear that the Scouts must deal with the world as it is, and that its policy towards adults who choose to practice homosexuality must change. Advocates for homosexuality say the move is reflective of a trend towards condoning gays, which is taking place all across the United States. And the Scouts are simply doing now, of their own volition and accord, what the courts will force them to do if they don't. The abusive use of force continues to be an issue with law enforcement as well, as this week yet another case of police brutality is scorching the airwaves and inflaming the nation. This time, the body cams of Virginia officers captured police in hostile action towards a citizen who was experiencing a medical emergency. Footage shows the driver, who had already struck another vehicle and knocked over a traffic sign driving the wrong way down the street, receiving excited commands from officers to raise his hands. When a citizen fails to comply, an officer moves in and fires a taser. When that fails to be effective, the officer dumps a continuous stream of pepper spray into the face of the victim. At that point, the citizen, who was taken out of his car and spread on the pavement, where his vehicle then rolled onto his foot, before one of the officers finally begins to communicate with the citizen to discover the problem. The man weakly replied that he was sick. That turned out to be the truth, and the officer who decided to tase and pepper spray the citizen has now resigned. The lead detective, Captain Rick Pinnock, says the officer's actions were not in compliance with department policy or training, which requires officers to exercise appropriate restraint and good judgment in their dealings with citizens. Ironically, despite the mishandling of the emergency, the victim, who was eventually taken to the hospital, could still face charges. The use of force is also making headlines this week in other ways, as the activist group Human Rights Watch says mentally ill prisoners are being abused in detention centers all throughout the U.S. Their report describes inmates suffering at the hands of force, which activists say is excessive, unnecessary, and motivated in some instances by malice, and included in their report is graphic footage of abuses presented to support their claims. The account details everything from the use of electroshock and pepper spray to scalding showers and being left for days in a restraint chair. One of the authors of the report says that the public and legislators for far too long have been willing to send people to prison without thinking a whole lot about what life is like behind bars, and what goes on behind bars, she said, is often hidden. One case in particular, which is gaining widespread attention, involves 35-year-old Christopher Lopez, who was found semi-conscious on his cell floor. Institution personnel didn't seek medical assistance, but instead treated Lopez as non-compliant. Mr. Lopez was ultimately placed in a restraint chair, where 2 hours later he experienced a severe seizure. Officers removed the inmate from the chair and handcuffed him on the floor, where he died several hours later. The family's lawyer, David Lane, says that here in the U.S., mentally ill prisoners are seen as a management problem, as opposed to mentally ill human beings. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Qatar, Jeff, back to you.
Certainly evidence that not only the inmates, but also the officers need the rehabilitation.
That's right.
Well, just about everyone these days has a smartphone and uses it not only for talking, but for work, banking, emailing, and pretty much everything else. So it's surprising for some that those personal apps and in their phones can be vulnerable to snooping by hackers, criminals, even spies. Now, top secret documents from Canada's Communication Security Establishment show Canada and its allies have worked to break into mobile phones of interest.
Oh. In 2012, the company targeted online stores and computer servers that sell downloadable mobile apps, but not in their own countries, but elsewhere, such as Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. They were looking for servers that could be used to secretly implant spyware into a suspect's smartphone.
Now, some of the biggest names in smartphone technology, like Apple and Samsung, were among the brands targeted. Military experts say the spyware would only be used on prime suspects, or what they refer to as intelligence targets, not just everyone.
Well, in other news today, the Southern Plains have been experiencing more flooding. Hundreds have already been forced from their homes with more rain in the forecast. For several days now, record-breaking rainfall has been pounding parts of Texas, causing dangerous flooding. Cars have been left stranded or submerged, while others left floating.
Rain has been a welcome relief for the Texas state that's been struggling with drought. In South Texas, Corpus Christi, with more than 12 inches of rain, has made this the wettest May on record. Now in North Texas, Lake Arrowhead was only about 20% full at the beginning of last year, but with the recent rains, it has nearly filled it.
And that's a lot of rain in a short period of time. Well, the Wichita River is also rising rapidly, threatening as many as 200 homes. And Barry Levy with the Emergency Operations Center in Wichita Falls said, "We have been praying for rain for a good 3 years, and now that we have as much rain as we're going to need for the next 10 years, I think people are going to start praying for the rain to stop."
Well, students at a British university have decided to throw the Bible out of their dorms. Aberystwyth University students feel including the Holy Book in bedrooms is inappropriate in multicultural environment and feel Christianity is being forced upon them. Now, almost 300 students voted for the move.
The head of the university's Catholic Society doubts the decision will actually promote multiculturalism because he believes truly inclusive society beliefs must be shared rather than segregated.
Well, Aberystwyth University is not the only place in Europe the Bible is being banned. One of Britain's largest hotel chains also decided to remove all of its Bibles from its hotel rooms in order not to discriminate any religion at all. Now, Ben Harris Quinney, who is the founder of a conservative think tank, feels such cases could mark some serious consequences for the country as a whole.
That's right. Mr. Quinney said, "I think it's a great shame when traditions like this are abolished, particularly when it's abolished from so few votes being passed. We've seen this sort of thing occurring across the country, and Britain is a Christian nation," he says. Now, if we don't want to be a Christian nation anymore, then that is going to be a very serious change in our country, and it's going to mark a significant transition in the history.
And across the English Channel, a French court ordered a statue of Pope John Paul II be removed, saying it violated the country's laws regarding the separation of church from the state. Now, the same law also prompted a court in Nantes to ban nativity scenes last year from public places. So you see, Qatar, more of these people are feeling that Christianity is being pushed upon them, and they don't want to have anything to do with it.
Well, that's interesting. Well, as we've recently reported, the number of Christians in the country is dropping sharply. The Pew Research Center released their findings in a report, and it said that America's changing religious landscape, which was what the report's name was. It says the drop in Christian affiliation is particularly pronounced among young adults, with that age group falling 8% in the last 7 years.
Well, despite being the home to more Christians than any other country, the number of Christians in the United States is dwindling, and millennials seem to be leading the pack. Brandon Neely, in his 30s, said, "People are really interested in faith or spiritual conversations, but not interested in, let's say, church." Now, Neely blames religion's perceived hypocrisy. That's what he said, the perceived hypocrisy there. Divorces and anger, or you go on to Facebook and you know people who are Christian that are slashing other people who are different than them. So they're saying their actions aren't matching up with what they teach.
That's right. Well, Pastor Glenn McCarthy blames the church's lack of social justice stances for pushing away young people. He says for a lot of them, they are not really seeing how local churches are impacting the community and our nation abroad. So I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing the decline. The Pew Research Center says there are 3 million fewer Catholics compared to 8 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Pew Research Center surveyed 35,000 American adults. It found almost every major denomination of Christianity has lost a significant number of members. Now, more than 1/3 of millennials now say they are unaffiliated with any kind of faith. That number is up by 10% since 2007. Well, for all those who have also been seeing the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church, Yeshua Hawkins is inviting you to the House of Yahweh. Start your new journey by contacting the House of Yahweh and requesting a free prophetic word or monthly newsletter, which is packed full of Bible prophecies being fulfilled, scriptural truths that scholars have struggled with, and vital life-saving changes that will give you the peace and health you've been searching for. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494, or you can visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also email them at info@yahweh.com, and for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, another informative message from Yeshua Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.